The year is 101 BC in the region of Cisalpine Gaul. Two massive forces descend onto the flat lands near the town of Vercellae. A final reckoning between the Romans and the migrating storm of Germanic and Celtic peoples, the Cimbri, who have haunted Rome for over a decade. The battlefield was referred to the Romans as the Raudine Plain, a vast stretch of open ground in northern Italy, bordered by sluggish rivers and sparse trees. The Romans, however, were well prepared for such an occasion. In their ranks were roughly 50,000 troops, mainly Roman legionaries, well trained, experienced and exceptionally armed for battle. At their center, they were commanded by the Roman proconsul, Quintus Lutatius Catulus. Commanding the Roman heavy cavalry on the left was the five-time consul and extremely popular Roman general Gaius Marius, who 1 year earlier in 102 BC annihilated the other invading Germanic tribal force, the Teutones, at the Battle of Aquae Sextiae. Commanding the Roman right was the up-and-coming Roman general Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla aided Catulus's army in attempting to stop the Cimbrian advance into northern Italy, but their forces were significantly outnumbered, and the two were ultimately forced to retreat southwards for reinforcements. A large force of some 60 to 80,000 Germanic and Celtic warriors stood across from the Romans, led by the Cimbri king Boiorix. Historians debate the actual size of the Cimbrian force. Many suggest it was 200,000 that faced the Romans that day. Logistically, it would have been far fewer, as one must take into account for losses during previous battles, not to mention establishing manned garrisons in newly conquered towns and settlements across the northern Italian region would have dwindled the main Cimbrian force dramatically. The Cimbri, ever confident in their stature as for years, this vast Germanic and Celtic peoples had shattered Roman armies in previous engagements, at Noraia in 113 BC, and Arausio in 105 BC. Legion after legion had been swept away. Rome had trembled before them, and in their minds this battle would be no different. The Cimbri advanced in a massive, densely packed formation. Their warriors wore little armor, favoring shields, spears, and long swords. They sang war chants and struck their weapons against their shields, creating a terrifying roar meant to unnerve their enemy. The Romans positioned themselves with the sun and wind at their backs, knowing that the northern warriors, unused to the Italian climate, would suffer under the heat and bright glare. Gaius Marius, a skillful commander, opted to let the Cimbri advance closer towards his force, as he had devised a strategy to best optimize the superiority of his heavy legions. He would allow the enemy infantry towards his center unimpeded. Once far enough out of the equation, he ordered cavalry contingents on his right and left to advance. The Roman right, led by Sulla, mirrored the charge of Marius's cavalry on the left. The plan was to strike in unison, giving the Cimbrian cavalry little or no time to react to the blitz. The Germanic Celtic warriors edged closer toward the Roman center, confident that their numbers would smash through the Romans, as they had in many battles in the past. What had drastically changed in that time period, however, was Marius's ascension to consul, in which he introduced many reforms which greatly improved the Roman military, particularly its legions. The Roman infantry were now equipped with the latest arms and armor at the expense of the state. The legions were increasingly drilled in a professional and cohesive manner, which made them all the more deadly in a head-on engagement. Marius and Sulla's contingents struck the Cimbri flanks, cutting down their mounted warriors by the dozens. The clash of cavalry was a sight of sheer brutality as riders speared head-first into one another, dismounting many in the initial clash. The Roman cavalry were better armored than their Germanic foes, as well as having momentum on their side, giving them the clear advantage against the Cimbri riders. Marius had advanced his riders into the battle with the prior knowledge and confidence in his cavalry's greater numbers. Their superior arms and armor, as well as his riders, enhanced nimbleness and swiftness on the battlefield. All of these factors combined drastically shifted the balance of power in the Romans' favor. Not soon after the clash, the Cimbri riders were forced to retreat, or be slaughtered to the last man. This was a disastrous start for the tribesmen, but all was going as planned for tactful Marius and the Romans. The Roman cavalry gave pursuit to the broken Cimbri riders, whilst at the center the hordes of Cimbri warriors closed in on the Roman legions. The legionaries braced themselves, gripped their pilums, then loosed them by the thousands into the mass of enemy infantry. A sea of iron-tipped javelins flew as one, crashing into shields and bodies. The soft iron shanks bent on impact, pinning shields uselessly to arms or dragging them down into the earth. Cimbri warriors tore free or cast their shields aside and charged on. The clash was brutal, bodies slamming together. The Romans fought close in their disciplined wall of shields, stabbing with short swords into bellies and groins, sluggishly advancing step by step behind locked shields. The Cimbri swung great axes from above, splitting any Roman helmet that was not concealed. The Roman legionaries had been drilled exceptionally well under Marius and his counterparts. They were a well-formed group of professional soldiers that focused on fighting as a unit, as opposed to their Cimbri foes who fought as individual warriors. The legions were so well drilled that after a few minutes or perhaps less of intense fighting at the front line, that the legionaries were rotated to the back of the cohort, whilst the second and third lines were rotated to the front. This would provide the Roman front line with a near-endless supply of fresh troops. This masterful tactic by the Romans would typically ensure that troops at the middle and back of the cohorts would usually see battle, thus making sure no troops, if of course not already killed in battle, would tire out on the battlefield, which was usually catastrophic for an army. In a one-on-one fight, the sheer ferocity and strength of a tribesman warrior would beat a Roman soldier. However, the scenario had changed. The Cimbri warriors were not accustomed to fighting the Romans in such a manner. Their individual warriors fought ruggedly, undisciplined and without cohesion. Their Germanic Celtic warriors were being cut down in droves by the disciplined Romans. The bloodshed was becoming so increasingly high that the Romans went on the offensive. They edged forward, forcing the Cimbri line to slowly backpedal. With the hot July heat bearing down upon them, the Cimbri struggled under the Italian sun. Their heavy weaponry tired their arms. Sweat blinded their eyes. Dust, driven by the wind directly into their faces, filled their mouths and lungs. The Romans, pushing forward methodically, drilled to endure, continued to rotate men forward and back, maintaining pressure without breaking formation. Marius's and Sulla's cavalry contingent struck the Cimbri flanks, cutting down warriors already struggling to breathe. Catulus's men held firm in the center, whilst Marius pressed relentlessly. The Cimbri's great mass became a liability as they struggled to maneuver. The Cimbri line began to buckle. At the heart of the battle, King Boiorix, surrounded, wounded and exhausted, was cut down. Once their king fell, cohesion was lost, slaughter followed. With the vast majority of their army now broken, the Germanic and Celtic warriors retreated back towards their wagons and camps. A few brave souls stood behind and tried to fight back, but they were cut down in vain. Driven back toward the wagons, the Cimbri made their final stand. There they were cramped in by the weight of their own kin, trying to desperately flee through any gaps they could find. Many even climbed on top of each other to gain access atop the wagons. The last stand at the wagon dissolved into a slaughter once the Roman troops submerged upon them, completely removing any means of escape. Their wagons was where their families were gathered. Women, realizing defeat was inevitable, resisted capture with desperate resolve. Ancient sources describe mothers killing their children and themselves, rather than submit to Roman enslavement. Others fought with improvised weapons among the wagons, but to no avail. The killing lasted hours. Few escaped. The victory at Vercellae ended the Germanic threat to Rome, destroying the Cimbri and bringing Marius immense prestige. Although Marius and Catulus disputed credit and celebrated a joint triumph, the battle marked major political consequences. It ended Marius's justification for repeated consulships, elevated Sulla's reputation, and helped spark their later rivalry. Marius's decision to grant Roman citizenship to allied troops without Senate approval set a precedent for generals defying the Senate, foreshadowing later actions by Sulla and Julius Caesar that would ultimately lead to the fall of the Roman Republic. But how does Rome finally stop a migrating war storm that's been crushing legions for a decade? At Vercellae, it comes down to 5 advantages. I laid all 5 out in a free PDF, simple, visual, and easy to follow to go along with this video, with additional information and maps so you don't just watch history, you can relive it. It's linked in the pinned comment.